Ooh, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Listen, the struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, I'm Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, I'm Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the AZAPO online political education series. Today is our last broadcast and for the year, so we're ending it in style through a roundtable discussion. So we're going to try and take it easy, and we are in a roundtable discussion discussing and reflecting on lessons from Steve Biko. As some of you would remember, on the 18th of December is the date on which he was born, and it would have been the 74th anniversary of his birthday. And we have decided to take a bit of time to reflect on the lessons from what he has given to this country, what he has given to our liberation project, and how we can then take, that philosophical outlook and framework forward, for it to continue to contribute to, the project of liberation in this country. With me this afternoon, I have comrades Nelvis Qekema, I have comrade Thabiso Nkone and comrade Khathu Mamaila, who will be engaging in some kind of an open discussion around, the future of our country and the present circumstances we are finding ourselves in, and taking cue and lessons from the teachings of Bantu Steve Biko. Welcome, comrades.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll start off with, right into it with, Comrade Thabiso, who is sitting elsewhere on the other side of the virtual platform, just his own lessons from Biko. What would be the most, what we would call poignant lesson that you have learned from Biko, and that really resonated with you and made you to connect with his views and ideas in a very special way, to the point of committing yourself to the struggle for the liberation of our people?
Thank you, Comrade Simpiwe, and good afternoon to my fellow panelists there. And good afternoon to all the comrades and ladies and gentlemen who joined us. Maybe firstly, I must apologize and indicate why I am not there with you. I would have certainly wanted us to have that discussion face to face. I think it would have been very interesting to see the facial expressions of people as they put their points across and so forth. Yeah. Unfortunately, I came down with a flu, so exercising an abundance of caution. So I decided, let me stay home, and so that I do not pass on whatever I might have to the comrades in the panel. Now, my engagement with Steve Biko started a long time ago. I think I was 13 or 14, around the time when I first came across Steve Biko. And at the time, what he said, I felt it viscerally. It was like I felt it in my gut. So it was more of a gut thing than an intellectual thing for a 13, 14-year-old. Biko spoke to me in a manner that empowered me. He effectively said that I have a purpose, and that my life and the life of my people matters, and that I have agency. You know, I'm a subject. I'm not the object, an object of history, but I'm a subject. I can help change history. Now, at the time, I did not have the language of agency and subject and so forth, but it was just the whole idea that as a 13-year-old, I had seen the lives that Black people were living as I was living it, and Biko posited a possibility of a different life. And that captured my imagination and my commitment in many ways. And later on, when I got to experience other Africans writing about the African situation, that visceral feeling was more and more, became more both visceral and intellectual in a way. So I would say Biko shaped who I am. He shaped how I perceive the world and how I interact with the world and the various people in it.
Thanks, Comrade Thabiso, and I'm sure a lot of us, we have been touched by people have, varied views and opinions on how we view Biko. And thanks for reflecting. Comrade Nelvis, you have written quite extensively on Biko, and every year without fail, you have always contributed your own views and reflections on what Biko should mean, for Black people in this country. How would you summarize, your reflections on Biko, in this 74th anniversary of his birth?
Thank you, Comrade Sempiwe. I think I would say, well, there is something that you can learn from Biko. I think first of which is originality, because at the time at which Biko got into the center stage of politics, he was very young. And then there were quite a lot of things that were happening in the world. There were quite a lot of things happening in South Africa, Azania. There were quite a lot of organizations that were there, huge people, highly respected people, organizations, people have been killed, people have been jailed and all those type of things. And here is a teenager who then sits back and look at the world, not with awe, and then is not cowed down by the world, but then he takes the world by the scruff of the neck and says, you know what, I see all the things that were happening, but out of everything that is happening, I'm going to carve my own thing, the way I see it, the way I feel, the way I want to do it, the way I want to write about it, which is what I like, the way what I want to do about it, which is what is relevant to liberating our people, the Azanians. So originality, and then you look at also the fact that Steve was brave, because he did not say, I'm young, I'm not ready. He jumped onto the stage and said, I'm a teenager, it's okay. In my early 20s, it's okay. And that is why Steve did everything that he did in less than a decade, the shortest of time to do the kind of work which he did, married, had children, went to jail and got killed, just done everything and left us a seminary work, which now we're able to go beyond the selflessness. Look at how the men got killed. He is behind bars. He could have changed if he wanted to. He could have said, no, I'm dumping this thing. But he was still fighting behind bars and then ultimately, laid down his life for Black people.
And it's quite interesting that you're saying Steve was prepared to lay down his life, for Black people. And I suppose, Comrade Khathu, you took cue from people like him. You were also at one stage prepared to lay down your life for Black people. And I suppose that had a connection with, the teachings of Biko. Can you just give us your own reflection?
Thank you very much, Comrade Sinteo. He was the embodiment of what I call a champion of Black power. And from him, he dealt with fear. That's why it was so easy for some of us to answer the national duty call of serving the struggle at that level. But for me, his brilliance lies in him. He finds black people victims of colonialism, slavery, and all that. We are at our weakest point, and he restores to us a sense of somebodyness amongst black people, a sense of worthiness that we deserve better than what we are. And once at a mental level, you would say you are an equal human being like other human beings across the world, then you are in a position not to accept being oppressed by other people.
Yes.
And once you say you are worthy, you are somebody, because he restored that sense of somebodyness amongst us. Then obviously you said, no, we can't accept the fact that some settlers from another continent will come here, take our land, subjugate our people, introduce their culture, impose it. So at that point, once you accept that you are worthy, then you rebel against oppression.
Yeah.
And he also spoke about the concept of fear. He wrote eloquently about the fact that one of the most important thing that is keeping black people oppressed is a sense of fear. At the time, you'll remember that when they came to the stage, it was 9 years after Sharpeville massacre, and a lot of the struggle was basically suspended. There was nothing happening in the country. And he said, even the manner of your death can be a politicizing event. So you are either dead or you are alive. But when you die, for heaven's sake, die for a worthy cause. So he reconciled a lot of things that were very problematic for us. But another thing that I thank Steve Biko for, it's his sense of teaching us not to be victims of our own circumstances. That we have in us the mental strength, the capacity to put the destiny of whatever we want in our hands. Because if you accept his quotation of he spoke about this, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And once you understand that a lot of things that are happening to black people is that failure of understanding that you cannot be free for as long as you're looking for a freedom, you've located your freedom in the oppressor's camp. Because the oppression of black people did not happen by accident. It was very deliberate on the part of white people. And so it wasn't just going to change simply because they feel mercy or they have mercy on us. And which is why he was saying, no, we're not saying white people cannot participate in the struggle. But if they were to participate, maybe their role should be to tell their own white counterparts about stopping oppressing black people. Yeah. And he spoke a lot about unity of black people. He spoke a lot about black solidarity. And more than 20 or 25 years after the first vote, we see that we need Steve Biko's ideas today more than ever. Because when you look at it, it's almost like everything that black people govern, there's something wrong that we do. So it's almost like we have to revive that sense of pride of saying we are capable. This narrative that black people are useless, they are lazy and all that, we must counter that with black excellence. And that's what, when you embrace the somebodyness among black people, the fact that you are worthy, and for me it's the first thing, that because if we say we are worthy, we will refuse to stay in shacks. We will build ourselves houses. We will, even this thing that you see in newspapers, where government is now building shacks for people. You say that if we accept that we are worthy, we wouldn't do this to each other. We wouldn't be corrupt. We wouldn't loot state resources. We will value ourselves. We will not be trapped in problems of having to lighten our skin, to buy fake white hairs, to artificially make ourselves look like white, because those are all signs of a defeated, colonized people, and where the test of whether something is good is white. It's almost like everything good, pure is white, but everything, even everything black is silver. And so Biko gave us that sense to say, no, we must accept ourselves as we are, and we must accept that we are somebody.
What you're saying, it reminds me of my years when I was still, a student, of Azania in high school. We used to speak a lot about, Black consciousness being a way of life, Black consciousness being an attitude of mind. And it's very simplistic the way it's explained, but it took a long time for, some of us to understand the exact meaning, that you can put to this philosophical expression and explanation of Black consciousness as a way of life and an attitude of mind. And perhaps it's something that we can talk about as to how should we understand this reference to Black consciousness as a way of life, as an attitude of mind. How do you explain it? When you say it's an attitude of mind, it's a way of life, what does that mean in essence, Comrade Nelvis?
No, I would say when you talk about a philosophy in it has, the physical aspect and the psychological aspect. Now, when you talk about philosophy, you talk about philosophy referring to the, actual circumstances of the people, the way they live, and out of the way they live, and then how they are thinking, their ideas, what they think of themselves, what they think about what is happening around themselves, what they think about each other, what they think about those who are oppressing them, and those who have taken their land, all those type of things. That's what philosophy is about. So in other words, the physical circumstances of the people, the existential conditions of the people, the circumstances of the people, will then, give them ideas, or they will extract ideas from their practical circumstances, which is why if the physical circumstances are such that they have been robbed of their land and then oppressed and put into, concentration camps, so to speak, and then they will respond to that and develop ideas, out of that. And then having developed those ideas will also, in other words, they will develop consciousness. Yeah. And that consciousness and awareness and consciousness will then give them the psychology, of the revolution, which is that we must now begin to change our circumstances. Like I've written elsewhere, if people do not have shelter, and that is their physical conditions, conditions of existence, they will respond to that and then begin to say, this is not right, develop ideas, this is not right, how do we change this? Who has caused us to live in this wilderness? And is this right? Is this how God willed it? Is this how other people willed it? And then they start to say, no, we're human beings, and our humanity does not resonate with how we live. And so therefore, we deserve, a decent housing, and then we'll start now fighting for that and building that for themselves. But they will not do what is happening now. Even when people have that semblance of power, they still build something that is worse, than pit toilets.
So taking two from Thabiso,
yeah.
You have an understanding of your existential conditions, and you have this in your psychological understanding of these conditions that says there's something wrong with this, and yet you don't do that which a revolutionary thinking person would want you to do. Would you say there's something wrong with the consciousness of that person?
Yeah. So let's start with that quote. I like the full expression of that quote that you started with. He says, being Black is not a matter of pigmentation, but an attitude of the mind and a way of life. I think you said it sounds simple, but actually it's very nuanced because Biko was shying away from these simple and sort of essentialist ideas of what it means to be a blackness, this pigmentation, you know, these fixed attributes that would constitute blackness. And what Biko took seriously, as I think Comrade Nelvis speaks to, is the consciousness. And we've all sort of agreed to that the consciousness that we have to come into consciousness. Now, Comrade Nell spoke about the material condition, but Biko did not think that coming to consciousness would be automatic. Him and his colleagues emphasized the whole aspects of conscientization. So coming to yourself, as it were. Yeah. So he would fully, the question that you ask, you are aware of the environment, but you are not acting. He would fully be able to deal with that, because he said not all of us are black. You know, they are non-whites, and those non-whites are people who have not come into consciousness. And that coming into consciousness is both a responsibility of yourself as an individual and a responsibility of those who have come into consciousness to try and set you on your path of coming to consciousness, so that once you are aware that what you are experiencing, the material conditions that you are experiencing, and you have developed the self-worth and the understanding of your own history and your own humanity, you are then able to engage in a struggle that will seek to deal with the material conditions that you are facing. I think the definition that they came up with of being black is those who are black are all those who are by law or tradition politically oppressed, economically exploited, and socially degraded, who emphasize identify as a single unit in the struggle for their emancipation. It's a powerful definition, because it also connects to what Comrade Nelvis is saying. It gave us a standard. Biko speaks a lot about the importance of our own values and standards. It gave us a standard so that we can measure whatever progress in relation to these three aspects that he has made. Are we politically oppressed? Are we socially discriminated? I guess, are we economically exploited? And therefore, any freedom that lacks any of those aspects is a deficient freedom, and therefore cannot be called true freedom. So Biko gave us a tool of analysis and a framework in which we can think about our lives and our role in this universe.
Yeah, but Comrade, you know, Biko says black consciousness is for black people. It is for every black person, including those that Comrade Thabiso refers to as non-white. You know, in as much as we are saying it is, you know, not everybody is necessarily black, and there are those who are excluded from, you know, from their blackness. But even those who are excluded by Thabiso from that blackness can also be black. So
yes. No, it's true. I mean, all people who look like me can be black. And he was more accommodative. He included people who come from people of Indian origin, because their arrival to South Africa was forced labor, became slaves. He included people of products of interracial relationships, the so-called colors. But the key point here is to understand, is Kwame Ture once taught us that the task of revolutionaries or the conscious people is to make the unconscious conscious. So in that sense, we should not blame people who are not conscious for their unconscious state of mind. It is our job to share this information and this consciousness with them, because whether we like it or not, we should not assume that people will automatically just be conscientized. People are product of their environment. If you grew up in Siska, where the civil brothers were running, and you are in the civil service there, and you've been indoctrinated to think that the liberation movement, whether it's Azania, Nkone, or APLA, these are terrorists. You are bound to embrace that reality, because that's your reality. And so when you engage with people, I mean, a lot of brutalities that was visited on freedom fighters, a lot of it was done by African people or other African people. Yeah. Because they were not conscientized. So in their own ignorance, they thought they were doing the right thing. And so if we move from history and fast forward to now, we find that a lot of our people are not conscientized to a point where you see it everywhere. I mean, when we protest, we ban things, and you would think that our engagement with the democratic state would be different from the engagement that we would, from the sort of things that we would do towards an apartheid state. Mm. But because of that lack of that conscientization, we would do things that are very strange. We would ban schools. We would. I mean, there's this quote that is stuck in my mind of a kid somewhere in the Northwest who says, "We didn't go to school today because our parents banned schools." Mm. And we're thinking, parents who are supposed to be encouraging their children to go to school are banning schools. And so it means that we may have the vote, we may have the political power, but a lot of our people are not conscientized enough to understand how they must engage with that power, and even to accept whether we have power in the first place. If you hear a lot of our comrades, even those who are in government, when they talk about their circumstances, they still talk as victims of white racism. You know, you ask yourself, if we are in a country where 85% of people are black, we have a black government, why are we complaining about racism? Why is it that you can't use the power that you have to shape the country in the nature of things that we want? I mean, we've been so intimidated by white racism to a point that it's almost like a swear word to say you must rename this country Azania. Rhodesia was, Zimbabwe was Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, Zambia was not Northern Rhodesia. People have got, countries got their own African names, but the way we're so intimidated by the white power structure that I think we did not dismantle. Every discussion that we engage around transformation, it's almost like we look at our back and check whether white people are not in. And I think it's because even those who are in power, many of them are not conscientized. Many of them have not embraced the need to dismantle the colonial architecture of our economy. I mean, any indication that we look at, the people who are living in sheds, it's exclusively black people. The majority of people who are unemployed, black people. People who are dropping out of universities, black people. So any indicator of something which is bad, you realize that we are not making progress in that regard. And to a very large extent, it's because even a section of those who are supposed to be in power are not conscientized. I mean, when they speak, you can hear that these are people who are very frustrated about something, but the point is that they do not even appreciate the fact that they've got the power to determine our own destiny collectively.
Comrade Khathu is saying that even those who are in power do not seem to be conscientized for this. And I mean, you and I do know that the majority of those who are running our country today are descendants of this movement of Biko. They were taught Black consciousness, and they claimed to have understood Black consciousness as a philosophy that helped liberate their minds. Why is it that they seem to be afraid to express the Black consciousness that they learned from Biko during those times? We had said that the problem of this country is really racism, and our solution to it is anti-racism, and that can be attained through a very strong dose of Black solidarity. And we do not seem to be getting Black people gelling together, fighting this racism as a group. So why is it that we are seeing Black people not uniting around the problems that we find for this country?
No, I think if you start at the beginning, start with Biko.
Yeah.
Biko talks about a liberation in 2 dimensions. It talks about physical liberation and psychological liberation, which is consciousness. Okay. Now, Steve Biko tells us that it is problematic, if people attain only one aspect of that liberation, which is the physical liberation. Because if they do so, and they're devoid of that psychological arm, which is the conscientized arm or the consciousness aspect of it, then there is a problem. Because then those people can be a danger to themselves. In fact, those people could find themselves easily doing, as Fanon says, doing what the master was doing. They continue to do what the master was doing because they're not conscious, they're not aware. They continue to do all that they were interested in is to say, is how the master lived in a house like this, he drives something like this, he lives in a house like this. Oh my goodness, are these the toys of the master? Is this the food of the master? Is this the wife of the master or the husband of the master? Oh my goodness. Oh, how I wish I could do the same thing. But you see, there's lack of consciousness there because they're not thinking about the things that matter. And so it was that in this country, what seems to have happened is that instead of us dismantling, the oppressive and exploitative apparatus, the colonial apparatus, where actually inherited it and removed or in fact did not even remove, actually, as the concept now goes out there, the master, the colonialist, simply stepped aside and allow us to drive his car, and now that he's sitting at the back of his own car. We are now choppers of the colonialist, racist, and master's car. And that is exactly why we're doing all the funny things that he was doing, but we are now doing ourselves, and we're doing it now against our people, done by us, and on behalf of the colonialists, on behalf of the racists, on behalf of the land thief. Yeah. Now, which is why, who is this American abolitionist? Is Harriet Tubman?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Harriet Tubman says, actually tried everything. In fact, she had the privilege that she could have left those people and then be a free woman in terms of those times, in terms of the husband he was related to. But he chose to side with these people, commit class suicide, and say, I don't care about my own freedom. My own freedom means nothing if it is not connected to the freedom of my people. My being rich means nothing if it is not connected to the resourcefulness of and the development of my people. And so Tubman says, then he kept on going back to liberate his own people from slavery. But some other people said, do we get out of here? At least there was some hockey, some pondoki here under a tree. Where am I going? I don't know where I'm going. So people were comfortable where they were, but they didn't know. And then that's why he says, I came here to liberate this number of slaves. But because these people lacked the consciousness of knowing and acknowledging that they are slaves, so I could not liberate them. I liberated less. And this is where now that psychological that consciousness, that Black consciousness that Steve Biko talks about, which is exactly what Khathu talks about. You see, when you see Black people, even when they have this semblance of power and they still continue to destroy schools, burn schools, burn down clinics and burn down every public property that is there. That has to do with the fact that, the relationship of Black people, Azanians, with property has been distorted historically by colonialism and racism. So they see property something that is not part of them, that has got nothing to do, that has something that has to do with, you know, the enemy, with the colony. It's outside them, which is why then every time they see they are angry, they vent their anger on the property because they don't see it. It's a negative relationship with property, and it is enhanced with the fact that those who inherited the oppressive apparatus who are now also black, they continue to do the same thing that the master was doing. And the people therefore see those property negatively as not part of them.
I hear you. I hear you. We are live on Facebook and we are live on Zoom. If you want to connect with us, please do connect with us on the Facebook page of AZAPO, the Facebook page of AZAPO Gauteng, AZAPO News System Cape, as well as AZAPO Biko. And you are welcome to engage with us as we continue with this conversation. I see Comrade Dr. Polis Luchulana wants to interact with us, and if you can just unmute and make your contribution.
Yes, good morning, colleagues.
Afternoon.
Yeah, I just wanted to problematize black in black consciousness a little bit so that we can have a discussion that speaks to the problem that we faced and we still face in South Africa, which is apartheid and its colonial nature. Given the racial hierarchy of that apartheid system, from which the emergence of black consciousness we saw in the mid-70s towards the 80s and everything else. The emphasis there has been around how apartheid divided us, if you recall, in terms of that hierarchy. I want us to think about black in black consciousness and talk about within black. How have we been able to deal with the problems within black in respect to the consequences of that hierarchy that was created by apartheid? The Congress movement at some point, had a slogan or a theme that said black in generals and African in particular. I think the point there was to look specifically at that hierarchy. So what do we say, for instance, to an accusation that says black consciousness, as defined now, as the colleagues have done, abstracted that nature of that hierarchy. Hence, we have now the re-emergence and emergence of tribalism, as well as tensions within the black, in inverted commas, in terms of that. Because we were never in our approach dealt fully or completely with the vestiges of the hierarchy, just with black, forget about white people now, amongst ourselves, and how we're located in South Africa, in stations that were dictated, provided for in relation to law and everything, Group Areas Act, in terms of that hierarchy. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Comrade Polis, and I do understand that the black consciousness philosophy has addressed the problem quite sufficiently. Comrade Khathu, you want to check on the question?
Yes, thanks. What we should not underestimate is the fact that the system was very deliberate in dividing black people, and you know, they made sure, they knew that if they were united, it would be very difficult for them to do the sort of thing that they're doing. If you pause a bit and leave this small problem here and just go the rest of the continent, the reason why imperialism is succeeding in terms of looting the resources of the DRC, many African countries, is because they exploit this thing of tribal differences and you keep on fighting each other. For as long as you're fighting, they are looting the resources of the country. You go to Sudan, you go everywhere. This is so. If you come back here, the narrative continues. You still, I mean, even if you look within, say, Venda-speaking people, there's still differences. People will tell you Baremba, Badao. So the point is that black people must collectively use black consciousness to shun these things that take us backwards.
Yeah.
And really look at the real issue is really getting out of the economic exclusion and growing the economic cake, so that when people have got resources, they are unlikely to think tribal. I mean, I spent a bit of time in Burundi understanding what gave rise to the genocide. At the core of that is the lack of economic opportunities to the majority of people. Yes. So when there are no economic opportunities, if you are Zulu, you will think this is happening to me because I'm Zulu, the process are loose cheap, and vice versa. When I was still working as a journalist on publication, I remember some old men called me to say, look at this cabinet. I think it was Thabo at the time. He was saying there was only one Venda-speaking person who was a minister. And I thought I didn't even look at it that way. That, I mean, I don't think that when ministers are appointed, you must be saying how many Vendas do we have, how many Shamans do we have. Because I thought we should look at people as South Africans. And it's a bigger struggle that we must wage. But you see, when people's conditions are not improving, they resort to this thing of tribalism. And some politicians use it very effectively to try to advance their own political agenda. You will say, I mean, such and such a tribe is not represented because by default, maybe if they were to appoint and develop a minister, they would probably consider him. But what Black Consciousness was trying to say is like, it was very deliberate, and it showed us that you're not oppressed because you are Xhosa or Landele. You are oppressed because you are black. And so when you undo that oppression, hold on to the black solidarity, because the real enemy is the descendants of the European settler, who has mastered this thing of us keeping on fighting for it. And if you look everywhere, like South Africa's got the biggest deposits for platinum. But the biggest exporter of platinum is Switzerland. They don't have one single platinum mine. Why? Is the colonial architecture of the economy. So we still live in a situation where all these raw commodities are shipped off our continent. And Israel is within the top 5 countries that export diamonds. They don't have diamonds in Israel. It's the same thing. So for as long as Africa we're fighting small battles, we're fighting each other. We're looking at every excuse where I mean, anybody can, even today, can anybody tell me the fighting between Nkata and the ANC in 1990? What was that all about? Exactly. You can't explain it. Even very clever people can't tell you what we're fighting about. But all I can say is that the people who benefited out of that war were people who were not black, because they knew that it's just this Africans slaughtering each other. And if you get into a train, you start spraying people with AK-47 bullets. The only person that you are sure you are not killing is a white person. But the sad thing is that it will be a black person. So it goes back to that thing of conscientizing. An unconscious black person is dangerous. That's a very dangerous person.
There was a time when Nelvis where this movement was everywhere. Conscientization of people was everywhere, and people were quite conscious. And all those lessons and gains of the revolution brings us through the 1994 settlement that came into being. Because I mean, what we are now talking about, in the reversals of the gains of the revolution, and most likely the work that has been done has suddenly been undone. Now we have to go back and re-educate people about their blackness, about their consciousness, and what it means to them. What else has happened?
No, quite a lot of things that have happened. Starting where the point that I made earlier, which is that you see, once you have a situation in the struggle where a class of people take over and then they inherit the oppressive or state apparatus, and then operate it on behalf of the master, the kind of thing they first have to do is to demobilize the people. Because if they don't, the people will continue on the momentum of the revolution and then, revolt against these people and then overthrow them. So they need to demobilize the people, they need to immobilize the people, and they need, to sell consent to these people. These people, must be oppressed this time around by their own consent. By their own consent. They must agree to their own consent. And then the other thing that you begin to see is the change of language in the country. You then start hearing people that for instance, universities that are like Vista or whatever, they're no longer called Vista now, that they will be called historically disadvantaged, historically disadvantaged. As if that disadvantage is part of the history and is gone by. But it is still here, and the historically oppressed, the historically marginalized. Our marginalization of Black people in the economy and then socially and economy it's not part of it's not something historical that is gone by. It is here with us. So you start hearing that type of language. You start hearing people talking about South Africa is post-colonial. It is not post-colonial because once you say it is post-colonial, you will stop fighting colonialism because you will think it's gone. Yeah, yet it is neo-colonial, which makes you to understand. So that's the first thing that you get. And then the other thing you also get a situation now, the unconscious person in power, where, for instance, somebody where you might get a minister, you might get or a politician or whoever, comes from Switzerland and boasts what? I've brought you a slab of sweet chocolate. And then you are expected to jump up and down when actually the raw ingredient that make chocolate are found in Africa, in the Ivory Coast and all around there. Yet the best chocolate making nations in the world, Switzerland, Belgium, and America, and so forth. And then why do you take a flight and go and fetch a slab of chocolate? So it is that now you now find a situation because of unconsciousness, lack of consciousness, where now people we have now undone what Black consciousness Steve Biko has achieved. The unity of Black people, where Steve has in fact even said, you know what? When I define, I must be careful and run away from pigmentation, because there might be people, Black community, Black people who might be, excluded by pigmentation, which is why now you find people going back. And then recently, who Balakambete was campaigning to be the president in the ANC, and his people from his village said, "We're going for our people because she will bring our own country here." That's what we must understand. And people are now beginning to say, "Aha." You know what? We're now colored, or we're no longer Black, we're brown, or we are yellow, whatever. That's what Black consciousness has done away, and they achieved, and then made us together now, because we now go for benefits and for myself, and nobody else for myself.
Oh, that's a mouthful. Comrade Sonkis, you want to talk to us?
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And greetings to those three legends there. Yeah, legends are not just dead people, comrades. Yeah. No, first and foremost, beautiful discussion. It's very refreshing. That's my first point. Yeah, very refreshing. I've got a couple of points, and even if comrades don't deal with all of them, some could just be for noting. So the first one is, I often hear in the nomenclature, even of AZAPO, that AZAPO also sometimes speaks of the current state as a democratic state, and how does one reconcile that with AZAPO's ideological position as it relates to the CODESA process? How does one reconcile that with that? You know, that's the first one. The second one is, what is the attitude of the Azanian People's Organization to what I would call new age BC groups, you know, and in particular, those types of groups, for instance, that were instrumental in the Rhodes Must Fall movement, the Fees Must Fall. There was also a similar group at Rhodes University called BSM, you know, which based themselves on BC, you know, as explained. What is the attitude towards those groups? And the last one is, in the context of developments like AfriForum and the persistence of Black landlessness, but also how Black political movements continue to respond to racism in a fragmented way. At the time of his assassination, Biko was working towards what one would call a united Black front, you know. To what extent is there appetite, you know, to revive that mission of Biko for the formation of a united Black front, you know? Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ompis. Quite interesting questions that you asked. You know, I was just talking, you know, with you know, some comrades around this call for a united, you know, front of, you know, more especially the BC-oriented organizations. And I was just writing to Comrade Thabiso, you know, the other day, you know, that's my misgivings, okay, that you find a lot of, you know, the people who are asking for this united Black front of BC people, being people of BC, who come from the BC movement and who mostly have left the BC movement, and then outside of the BC movement, they come and ask for us to come and establish some kind of a unity of purpose, a united front of BC organizations, which is something that I sometimes find quite problematic. Comrade Thabiso, you're smiling, maybe you want to get into that.
Yeah, no, I have a lot of catching up to do now. I see the disadvantage of not being there. There's just one thing that, in terms of catching up, that I want to speak to. I want to take a far more, what I would argue is like a radical approach as opposed to Comrade Nelvis. Comrade Nelvis spoke about he said two liberations. There's a mental and there's a physical. And then he said people can have the physical and so forth and not have the mental. I want to argue that Biko's reflections necessitated that you would not have any freedom if you do not have the mental freedom. I think when he speaks, when he makes that distinction between false and true integration, one of the things he speaks about in true integration, he speaks about people who, in fact, are an full expression of themselves. You know, so you can only attain that true liberation once you have attained the psychological, because then once you are free here, you will be able to say, I am cuckoo, I am not worthy of this. You know, I am not worthy of that. I am not worthy of that. So I think we need to be clear and looking at Biko seriously, we need to be able to say, this is not freedom as Biko would have had it. And be categorical about it and say, as Biko would have had it, this is not freedom, clar. And then we are still fighting for freedom. Now, this takes me to the question that Sompisi asked about the CODESA and so forth, and the democratic project. AZAPO was true to the Biko project and the Biko conception of freedom when it did not participate in the CODESA, because it saw freedom. You know, in liberal democracies, there is negative freedom, so you are free from. So they always speak about free from abuse of power, free from this, free. But there is also a conception of positive freedom. You are free to. So you have the ability to act in a certain manner that will improve their lives. So that's what AZAPO was fighting for. It was fighting for positive freedom. Now, when AZAPO uses the conception of a democratic state, be clear that it's the conception of democratic state as in liberal democracy that is there. It is not the democracy that AZAPO would want and would want to instill, the democracy that is aligned with Biko's vision. So I would say we are just using a nomenclature that is standard. However, we have done a deeper analysis of this democracy, and that deeper analysis dates back to the early 1990s and so on. And there's this distinction that people can look up between a positive and negative freedom. And as I said, if you look at Biko's definition of what true integration is and so forth. So with regards towards the attitude of AZAPO towards BC movement. Now, Comrade Simpiwe, you made a point, and I take that point to heart, but I think we are required. I think Biko asks of us to have this unmeasurable level of patience. Biko demands that we should be patient with our people, and Biko was rebuffed a number of times with this whole idea of unity. He was rebuffed, but Biko never tired. In fact, he got captured coming back from Cape Town meeting, I think, with the unity movement and so forth. So we must have an unlimited level of patience with our people. So whether it's people who are coming from us and then they go out and then they say they want unity with us and so on and so forth, I think we must always be more mature and look at far more at the situation far more strategically and say we will entertain you, although we think some of the things are not irrational. With regards to the new movements, I think the new movements have brought in a certain agency and a certain way of thinking rooted in Black consciousness, but they have also integrated other elements. I would say AZAPO is welcoming and should be welcoming. I think Comrade Nelvis can speak more about that because he has engaged with those movements a lot in Cape Town and so forth. But I don't think AZAPO has any negative attitude towards that movement. I'll leave it there for now, Comrade.
Some will go as far as saying, Black consciousness doesn't belong to AZAPO. It belongs to the nation.
Yes, no, the Black consciousness belongs to Black people. Ideally, of course, if you are an AZAPO member, you want Black people to be members of AZAPO. but in reality, some Black people will be members, others won't be members of AZAPO. But you see, where I think people must actually be more accommodative is that South Africa, I would prefer it to be called Azania. Our country would be a better country if more people were baptized in Black consciousness. Because the sort of things that we do to one another as Black people, we wouldn't be able to do them if we were conscious of ourselves. I mean, you look at the level of crime in Black communities. I mean, people will kill you for a cell phone, And so the sort of abuse of women, of children, when somebody's sense of somebodyness has been restored, when you are worthy of yourself, when you have no issues about who you are, there are certain things that you will not be able to do. And you start there, you go to the sort of politicians that we have. I mean, the focus, 25 years later, we're still talking about whether, asking Black people whether they need land. We thought when we were struggling, the repossession of the land was a primary objective, but we still think that we should actually hold consultative meetings and ask people, do you think you want your land back? I mean, it's just a gimmick. For me, when you respect yourself and you respect your people, there are things that you wouldn't do. And I mean, all I'm saying is that for as long as we have people who are black in color, but who are aspirant white people. So they for them it's like, they want to be white people in terms of culture, in terms of behavior. So all they want is that we want all those benefits that is reserved for white people. We should have access to them without understanding that the struggle was broader than that. We wanted to get our land back, but beyond that, we wanted to decolonize our country. Once you accept that, but if you are not a conscientized black person, you will not have a sense of the decolonizing project. You will think that people are wasting time and money. I remember when some people wanted to rename the Khathu, and it was not even white people who objected. It was other black people who were objecting. There's all sorts of narrative around how Makado killed those shamans who were fighting with the other boys. But people, if we, the point we are making about black consciousness being, it should be broader. So this country will be much better if many of our people were black conscious. Because a lot of the problems just emanate from failure to understand things, the way we relate to each other. Because you see, sometimes when people treat us in the manner that they treat us, they are also informed by how we treat each other. When they look at how violent we are, there are some things that you can never understand what we do to each other, how we treat African migrants who are coming to the country, as opposed to migrants from other continents. I mean, you will never hear people rebelling against Chinese or people from Yugoslavia or whatever they say, but people from the eastern part of Europe, basically, white people or Indians, but for some reason, we have this, loathe that we have towards other African people. And it's such a problematic thing. Like, whether we want a coach, and if you look at how coaches are appointed, even black players, when you are a black coach, you're not respected by black players. So you need to get some kind of guy from Europe who might not even have the experience of coaching any team. All that is required, he must be white, then people will listen to you. But you can be the best coach, but if you look like us, no. So I think we have this problem as black people. Maybe the first thing is just to admit we have a problem. Just maybe. If we accept that we have a problem, we might just want we might maybe just be prepared to get it attended.
Yeah. Nelvis, this philosophy of black consciousness is seen, I think, across the board as a wonderful philosophy, and one of the greatest things to have ever emerged in our country. And yet some people speak of it as though it does not gain resonance with black people. And I'm not too sure if that is true. I mean, considering what Thabiso was telling us earlier, with the emergence of all of these new age FBC groups. And I think black consciousness has allowed itself to permeate across the length and breadth of our country. And yet there is this view that it does not resonate with black people. And I'm not too sure whether people confuse AZAPO's decline and non-performance in parliamentary elections with black consciousness itself as a philosophy that has been gaining ascendancy in the politics of the country. What do you link this to? And maybe link that to the idea that why don't we consider this unity of black people as a means towards the continuation of our liberation project with all of these BC groupings that I mentioned.
No, thanks. And just before I get that, just to elbow one one area my comments have dealt with, and I'm not going to say anything. I want to leave it hanging.
Yeah.
I wish we could rethink, the use of the term tribe and tribalism. Because sometimes when we use these terms, and that's not what my comrades here do, but out there, when we use this term, we just hold it. because I just want to, we tend to keep tribe and tribalism exclusively for Black people.
Yeah.
Now, how many tribes are there in the white communities? And what are they? Where are they? What are they doing? Is our understanding is that there's no tribalism in the white community? Let me leave it there. Now, the second one I want to elbow, this thing about democracy. You see, in AZAPO, we define our democracy. We talk about a anti-racist, socialist worker republic. You know, that's our definition of democracy. So where we are right now,
That's not where we are.
no, that's not where we want to be.
Yeah.
It is just a starting point. It's not even the starting point. It's putting the key in the ignition. We're not intended where we are right now. But it does not mean we're going to reject that key. No, we don't go. As we accept that key, but we need to turn it, and our car moves, and our democracy develops. Because our democracy has got to be participatory. It has got to be developmental. It has got to help us to free us to move towards total liberation. That's not our democracy. That is why I'm worried sometimes when we hear people, particularly, let me not define it or describe it, but when you hear people talk about this thing, people, they really think they've really captured the word, constitutional democracy.
Yeah.
What a constitutional democracy. It's as if people don't understand that constitutional democracy can be as good as it is dangerous.
Yes.
Because if you understand how constitutions are made, the people who go to parliament, the Constitution Assembly, it is not the masses. It is indirect representatives of the masses. It's not the masses themselves. So there is here a political legal fiction that the people are gathered in parliament, in a small room in parliament, 55 million people making the Constitution. No, that is a political legal fiction, legal myth. So remember, that is why in the Constitution you find things that go against the masses. And the masses started to revolt against this Constitution. And they start asking, who don't tell us about the Constitution? They say, yes, it's supposed to be their Constitution that we pass. Now, come to your point. Now, when I come to your point, is that we need to have an understanding that there is no such a thing that Black consciousness does not resonate with Black people. Black consciousness is not relevant to Black people because there is contradiction in terms. It means you don't know what you're talking about. Because once you say that, it means you are saying Black people are not relevant to Black people. Black people do not resonate with Black people. Exactly. Because Black consciousness is in essence Black people. Their physical conditions and their mental their consciousness and trying to liberate themselves. And what are you talking about? So even that's the reason why Black consciousness has been able to make Black people tick, to make people act and react, to make people want to change their circumstances, even outside AZAPO. Even outside AZAPO. Black consciousness has been able to make lives difficult, even in organizations like the ANC. You find Black consciousness really is beautiful and progressive and dynamic. Even in organizations like ANC, you find people fighting about themselves and people say, this is not what we want, this is what we wish people from AZAPO to come here and lead us. And some come to AZAPO and say, why don't you come here and lead us? It shows you that the resonance is resonance. And resonance is in itself resonance. So therefore, all that we need, therefore, is not to run away from the fact that because we are dealing with the reality, and reality is not necessarily self-evident, because if it's self-evident, it is misleading because there's no need to analyze it. Yet you must analyze it because it can mislead you if it is self-evident. So that's why you will find that even within AZAPO, there will be, a divergence of views, because the way we see reality is not immediately the same. That is why there is debate. That is why there is internal democracy. And that is why we must now resolve our contradiction through discussion, debate, within us. That's why, therefore, we must understand and welcome when there are groups outside AZAPO, and because those groups, even if they are outside AZAPO, they are right inside the Black consciousness movement. And therefore, AZAPO has a responsibility of providing leadership and talking to everyone, individuals and groups, even if they have a slightly, a skewed understanding of BC as we understand, we bring them home. And then Kwame Ture says, we're going to talk to our people. Yeah. If they slap, we go to bar. If they slap, we go to bar. If they slap, we go to bar. If they become a threat, we off them. We off them. We off them. Indeed.
Black people accept Black consciousness as their philosophy. And yet, Nelvis is saying, this philosophy is Black people. So the question of resonance doesn't even arise. And yet, the flag bearer of Black consciousness has been battling to connect with Black people.
No, you see, people can be victims of a lot of, as Comrade Davis says, a lot of fiction. I'm just starting with, no, serious. I mean, in this country, there's a popular myth that projects the ANC as the only liberation movement in the country.
Yes.
But if you don't have to look back, if you far, if you look at around 1960, just after the formation of the PAC, check the number of people who were hanged by the apartheid regime. Many of them, the majority were black leaders, or people mainly from the Transkei. Few people who went to Robben Island between the 60s and the 70s, the majority of people there were PAC members.
Yeah.
Come to the 70s, June 16 is a product of BCM. In fact, June 16 revived the liberation movement outside. The youngsters who left Soweto, who went into exile, virtually all of them were BC-inspired people who went there. Of course, when they went there was no organized BCM structure. Many of them joined the ANC, and many of the others joined the PAC. But so, come to the 80s, BC was the main political force in the country, and some called for its liquidation, which resulted into the feud between AZAPO and the UDF. But when you don't have all those historical accounts of what happened, you then have this narrow definition of liberation, of who liberated you. And once you have that misconception of history, because you think they liberated us, somehow you feel you are indebted to them. And therefore, that's why people think of like saying, we will punish the ANC, we will punish. No, the political parties ought to fight for your vote. It can't be guaranteed that when there's an election, you find very confusing arguments. Like when people talk about who's going to run this country, they can project 3 elections from now and tell you that the person who's going to be running this country 3 elections from now will be coming from this political party.
Yeah.
It's such a defeatist thing, and even dangerous to people, because one of the reasons you will get abused is when you've got a monopoly supply of any service. Once you monopolize the supply of service, you are creating an environment for abuse. So the abuse of power will happen for as long as the incumbents are not fearful of losing an election. Yeah. And that's not for the current ruling party. Even if it was AZAPO in power, if the environment was such that there is no visible threat to power. There's no, the only way you can secure real democracy, in Buddha democracy that is, not in the, as in the democracy that way. But in Buddha democracy, the only way you can actually protect power is to continuously ensure that there is insecurity of tenure of the incumbents. That's the only way to ensure democracy. But if you have a situation where people are assured of victory, even before contesting an election, you're going to be abused, and they will tell you that, they will even tell you that people don't care about corruption. This corruption thing is a figmentation of the imagination of the media, you know, like some few clever blacks. But so it is incumbent, and we then go back to Biko to say, if we accept that Biko taught us that our future is in our hands, we must then claim the power. You know, we should move away from this thing of thinking that some 400 people who are sitting somewhere in parliament can resolve the problems of South Africa. No, they can't. The problems of South Africa can be resolved by the 55 million South Africans. If you want to talk about corruption, who's paying the traffic of corruption? It can't be those 400 people. So eventually, our power, our own engagement with power and authority, is we must all get to a point where we say, if we want to change South Africa, it's upon us. Only us can change South Africa. So people will then creatively project one organization as the only organization, and then develop this narrative that, no, the outcome of an election shows that people are rejecting you. They will conveniently forget all other elements that contribute to a successful election, that there are billions that are invested in elections, that this organization has got no resources, that the people who are giving them money are people who are comfortable with their political program. How many white people are going to contribute money to AZAPO? An organization that says, check land like from white people to white to black people. I don't think if I was a white person, I would support this sort of radical organization. Of course. Yeah, and who has money in South Africa? Exactly. So why are you surprised that you're not going to get money from white people? In fact, I don't think you should even aspire to get that money, because once you start accessing that money, you must ask yourself, why are we now getting money from this one? You know, to me, as I said about this thing of getting support from white people, you know, you must be very, very suspicious of people who white people fight for you. You must so if this one, all of a sudden you find that when the white people, like, you know, we even coined the slogan that pants because we understood that our struggle is against them. Let's not even complicate it. Yeah. It's against those descendants of European settlers who came here and dispossessed us of our land. And that's the sense of the struggle. Of course, it has now developed into very complicated things, but in reality, the struggle is between the oppressed and the oppressed, and that oppression has not ended. You just have to look at who was what through the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. You will realize that black people are still excluded from the mainstream of the economy. Yeah, fighting for our land. Yeah. Comrade Sibongile Khariful.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Hashe. And the three legends that you are with, as really referred to them earlier on. Look, my little input is sourced from my background as a teacher. You are in a classroom, your learners fail. A good teacher, before blaming the learners, you look at yourself, how much did I contribute, or how much did I do that did not reach these students to produce as much as I expected them to have produced. You see, most of us, the disciples of BC, we are carrying it as a master plan, but we sort of do not have a very good implementing strategy to ensure that it permeates, it reaches the society in general. So we know more of what we should be teaching other people to can be able to deal with these other problems that the panel has been talking of. To a larger extent, it is us who are in the know, who understand this philosophy. who are unable to make sure that it reaches the depths of the Black nation, to make sure that we avoid some of the areas, problematic areas that we have been referring to. Just like Christianity, it is the converted who made sure that Christianity spread throughout the universe. I think it is upon us to say it is not enough that we are BC adherents, that we understand BC, but to say, let us try to work out a way over which or in which we are going to make sure that this BC is not shared, is not in that cocoon that is owned by us or by AZAPO or by a particular organization. It is something that we let loose and make sure that it reaches as far as it possibly can. Thank you, Chair.
No, thanks, Comrade Khalifah. I think what you are doing is to take us to Lenin, where he's asking everybody, what is to be done. Last week, I was sitting with Professor Kwandi Wekondo, where he was saying, perhaps one of the things that we need to consider is to repackage Black consciousness in our own languages and explain it in such a way that even those people who are sitting next to the kraals in the villages can be able to understand it when explained to. And perhaps we should refocus our thinking and programs to community activism as a movement. What do we really need to do, Comrade Nelvis?
No, I think to start with, I keep going back to this thing that in the Black community, Black consciousness is universal, in existence and influence, irrespective of whether you know or you don't know it. It's got nothing to do with that. In any event, I doubt if a donkey knows that it is a donkey in the sense that we human beings say it, but it just knows that it is what it is. That's what it knows. It is what it is. And so coming to this one, we just have to be careful first in that, and I'm now talking to AZAPO, I'm talking to the Black Consciousness Movement, and I'm saying, Ameka Cabra says, he just cautions us and says, we must be careful, because sometimes we think that what is in our head is a reality. And what is in our head, again, resonates with reality. When in fact, our mind can take us elsewhere. So he says we must be very careful about that. And Mao Zedong has a way of referring it as mountain topism, where you think, particularly if you have never traveled. If you have never traveled, you think the small mountain in your village is the tallest in the world, because you've never traveled. It's until you travel, you see. And then he calls it, so we must be careful about those things. And then again, what Mao still says, again, you must not be ahead of the masses, you must also not be behind the masses. And he calls it tailism. He says you must be with them. In other words, AZAPO must not be angrier than the masses. Because if it is angrier than the masses, there will be a problem. And AZAPO will find itself running ahead, going to wherever the people, and leaving the people behind. And then once that happens, then AZAPO, not BC. If that were to happen, I don't think it has ever happened. If that were to happen, then AZAPO would be irrelevant, but not BC. Because it has left BC and the people behind. So that's where the repackaging comes from within, because it then means the repackaging has got to be organic. It must not be AZAPO tells them what it thinks people want or want to say or want to have. It must be AZAPO like Biko used to do in their literacy projects, and then Biko and his comrades get into the trade, and then they listen to the people saying, oh, all type of things, and their anger, sometimes they provoke them to hear more, and the fact-finding mission, and from there they develop, their philosophy, at least lifting the textual version, of the philosophy itself into something that is now analyzed, theorized, and synthesized to be what we have today. But it's not something coming from their head, it's coming from the people themselves, because you don't want to. So in other words, please be with the people. If you are angry around the people, you then start talking things. You're angry, you're running ahead, even when you know that if you're a revolutionary, tone down, calm down. But with the people. Be with the people.
No,
But I wanted just to make this point, sorry. Even though I say be with the people, don't forget Che Guevara.
Lead the people.
Don't forget Che Guevara. Because if the apple doesn't fall from the tree, then you just have to pick it up.
Exactly.
You just have to pick the apple, otherwise you'll starve to death.
in fact, that's where I wanted to. Maybe that you raised the point, because I didn't want us to disagree publicly. Because in reality, revolutionaries, because of the exposure of literature that we have and stuff, it is possible that we can be ahead of the people. When Galileo told the people that he was living with, that the world was round, they told him to die. When AZAPO told South Africa that the 1994 arrangement that you are about to enter,
it's never working.
It won't work. Obviously, nobody listened to us, to AZAPO at the time. But and so the question becomes: sometimes your analysis can be correct, but the people may not believe you because of a number of things. I mean, when people were engaged in struggles, and some of them would even say it dates back to 1652 in April when that fellow arrived. And then over centuries, there was Bambata, there was Bohinza, there was Makado, there was Apla, there was Azala, there was MK. And then when there's an opportunity to vote, you say people must not vote. You are not convincing to these people. But 20 years later, 25 years later, people are saying, you were right. That thing that we thought was freedom, it's not freedom. We don't have the land. There was no transfer of the economy. We have nothing. We actually have become a machine land of white wealth. We now have got to act against black people to protect white wealth. So the point is that sometimes you can be right, but unfortunately, people may not buy your story, and that you should not necessarily change your position because people are not following you. And so this thing of being with the masses, it's a difficult one because they are maybe that's why Economic says the task of the conscious is to make the unconscious conscious. But it can be a very long process because you go to them to a meeting, they won't come. And then ask, how are you going to access these people who don't even attend meetings? Because other people, when they call them to the meeting, they'll pay for their transport, give them a t-shirt, give them food. And then when I say they must come to the meeting, pay for their transport, buy their own lunch, you're not serious with our attendance. So, but ultimately, where you are right, is that we can't give up on people. And because ultimately, it's there. We're just trying to share the light, because AZAPO might be carrying the light, but and which is what I'm saying to say. I keep on saying to people that when you have light and then you hide it, and then you start saying they are walking in the dark. That's not fair. So that light, because people can only, I assume that people are rational people, which is, I think we must make that assumption. But people can only act rationally on the strength of the information they have. So when we see our people behaving in a particular manner, it's the sort of information they are exposed to. And the challenge is to say, let's share information with our people to a point that they act within logic, within their rationale, because they've got information. And there are no shortcuts there. That's why it's a long process of sharing information, because you can only be really rational on the account of the information you have.
Comrade Thabiso,
Yes.
What would be difficult with us as Black people, with all of the BC formations that are mushrooming, and other Black people outside of the BC fold, coming together in solidarity, on the basis of our landlessness, on the basis of the fact that the liberation project is not concluded and we still need to march forward.
So what is the question, comrade? You said what would be the
impediment? Why is it so difficult for us to work together? Why do we see all these many fragments? I'm not too sure. Is it because we all are at the rooftops? As Comrade Nelvis was saying earlier on, we believe our village is better than others. Why is it so difficult for these BC formations to come together and work together towards the liberation of our country? You were saying earlier on, we must be patient with our people, and I agree that we need to be patient with each other because we are not at the same levels of consciousness, and we are not at the same level of maturity in terms of understanding where the revolution is at and how we move forward. But then, what do we need to do to enable us to work together as revolutionaries, as Black people, as people who are committed, to the revolution?
One of the things that I admire about Biko the most is that Biko was a realist. Although he aspired towards unity, he understood that the terrain is not an uncontested terrain. And one of the, I think, key indications of how that he understood that there's contestations within the movement is that in an interview that he gave to, I think, Gail Gerhard, he spoke about the fact that you would notice that SASO and the Black Consciousness Movement does not emphasize this whole idea of a future state, because he said that once you start talking about a future state, then you have all these people saying this is this and this and that and that and that. So in many ways, he was a pragmatic organizer. And I think one of the things that we need to deal with going forward is that, one, we need a certain level of pragmatism. Biko fused theory and praxis easily. He could move between those two worlds easily. We would need to identify key struggles that we need to wage today, and the formats of waging that struggle are different. I think Comrade Sompisi, in asking his question, he mentioned AfriForum. Now I've had a chat with Comrade Veli about AfriForum. There are certain things that we can learn about how certain organizations have used the current platforms availed to us by this deficient democracy and so forth, and how they have used that to advance their agenda. I think one, we need to do that. Secondly, there is a need to go back and remember that, as Biko spoke, that as important as the self, but what gives the self meaning and purpose is the collective. That all egos that might influence how we, what organizational form we take and who's who and who does what, all of those we should put aside so that we collectively we can advance the struggle. Much as I hate, to read Biko through the lens of other people, there's another philosopher who said, philosophers of the world have interpreted the world, but the aim is to change it. I think once we go back to that thing and go back to Biko's emphasis of praxis, then we will be able to move forward instead of having these theoretical debates that are unnecessary at times. I'll leave it there, Comrade.
No, thanks. We can just conclude.
Well, Thabiso, you're right. The beauty of Biko's word was
intention of going back to school.
when he spoke about that he will start a project. So he was able to mix theory and practice very effectively. And I think the challenge really from where we are is that I think that there's a very fair criticism that if you are so good in terms of analyzing, diagnosing the problem, why are your political fortunes so dismal? And you see, you can have all sorts of excuses that you want, but in reality, you must begin to actually say, it can be that we have these brilliant people like Nelvis, but somehow our fortunes are where we are. So there must be something that we are not doing that we should be doing, and I think it's a probably discussion that should be reserved for an internal discussion. But what we should not forget is that the power to change our country for the better resides with the masses of our people. They alone are the most effective vehicle to transform their lives. This gospel that has been preached so many times of we'll do this for you, we'll do that, is disempowering and it's not assisting. In fact, it creates a dependency syndrome where people think that they can protest to get things for free without working for those things. And people must be part of the whatever progress that we want to see happening in society. And we should accept that if we'll only be as strong as our people. And I think I can't emphasize this point enough, that those of us who are conscious, it's our duty to make the unconscious conscious. But we should always remember that the power to change society for the better resides exclusively within the masses of our people. Not some 400 politicians that are sitting in parliament. And once we accept that reality that the power is with us, because come to think of it, why is it that if we don't like this government collectively, the majority of us who are always complaining about that now unemployment is almost at 50%, our education is in a mess, our health system, then we've got all sorts of problems, but when we vote, we still vote for the same things. So it means we don't even appreciate the power that we have. And probably it's because many of us are unconscious, and the conscious must make the unconscious conscious.
No, thanks for that. Nelvis, you know, the majority of people in this country are very young. And what do you want to tell them as we conclude? What will be their takeaway from this conversation?
I just want to start by saying that, look, we must remember and not forget that probably Biko would still have been alive had he not treated Black unity, Black solidarity as a principle. He would have been alive, because remember, when he died, he had actually violated his conditions of his banning order, and then driven from Nkone, to Ekapa, and then in the course of trying to, this guy, is in bondage, so to speak, he's in the belly of the beast, but he was, roaming around the belly of the beast, because the eyes are outside, the beast can't see inside itself. And then still driving right inside the belly of the beast to unite Black people. It is because he went to see some people and groups in Cape Town, and then that visit actually was aborted. And he had to come back not having seen those people were supposed to see. And then he got arrested, roadblock, and then he's dead. And then, so the point is this, and that young people have got to understand one thing, that Steve Biko did everything that he did, his writings that are seminal today, he wrote them without a degree. Not that it is right not to have a degree, but can you imagine if he had a degree? Can you imagine if he had a degree? But he wrote without a degree. And then he wrote them between the ages of 19 and then 21.
Yes.
21 years. What the world is still busy with, you know, that black book we're still, you know, carrying today with pride. And then what stops our young people to say they can't do these things when there was a young man who did these things? There was a young man who changed the world to his own. There was a young man who found the world trapped in his own fear. And then that young man kicked his own people out of their cocoon of fear and got them running out there and striking and kicking. He did it. He did it. And a teenager talking to the world, a teenager talking to, you know, ambassadors from America, from where, and America facing judges, you know, interrogating judges and racist advocates when he was supposed to be the one, you know, interrogated or either, you know, cross-examined or re-examined, whatever the case may be, you know. So here is a guy who was fearless. Here is a guy, you know, who was selfless. He did everything, not so much for himself, but for his people, and died for his people. And then what stops our young people? Here is a young man, you know, in his early 20s, he's already a family man with jackets, very serious, very serious. No, he's not, you know, licking dummies and things and playing dice and whatever. He's a very serious statesman. Statesman. Here is a young man, you know, hardly 25. He's already building, you know, clinics for black people, literacy projects for people. He goes there in the agriculture setup, you know, digging up dams and leaving school. He leaves university, takes his people during holidays, dig up dams, agriculture with his people, teaches his people. What are young people in Azania doing today? What are they doing? Why are they sleeping and trapped and locked up in the classrooms? Why they can't leave those and then get entangled with their people? So let me just step off by saying today, let's not forget, a child was born. Today, a son of the soul was born, and who became a beacon of our hope, who died for us, of course, lived and died for us. That is a person we can never forget. So what is important for us as black people today, as Azanians, is to reactivate Biko, is to ensure that we put Biko right inside our hearts, we put Biko right, you know, on top of our lips. Whatever we say comes from Biko, we put Biko on our fists and on our feet, so that when we strike and kick, we do that with Biko, one to Biko.
No, thank you, Comrade Nelvis, and that was a mouthful. And I think people should understand that, you know, in as much as we celebrate the 74th birthday of Biko, and we are also continuing to celebrate the ideas that Biko gave to this country and gave to black people. And those ideas cannot be allowed to die. We have a responsibility as people who are conscious of his ideas. We have a responsibility of teaching, of taking Biko's ideas to the communities, of ensuring that younger people who are now at the age of Biko, when Biko was writing, understand his teaching, so that they can be able to advance the revolution, if not for themselves, but for their kids. We owe it to our people. Thank you for participating, and my comrades, and thank you for joining me in this conversation. And thanks everybody who managed to connect to this discussion. We will see each other in the following year, and I hope you enjoy your festive break. And thank you and goodbye. See you next year.